Good afternoon, my name is Tyler Watson. I'm here today to talk to you about the findings of my Galvanize capstone project, hashtag net neutrality. A little bit more about me. Prior to joining the Data Science Immersive course at Galvanize, I worked as a consultant for a company focused on international development and humanitarian aid projects overseas. Behavior change communication was a large part of what we did, so understanding what motivates human behavior and what sort of conversations people are having is something that's very important to me. So what did I do? I collected tweets from the net neutrality campaign that used the hashtag net neutrality on Twitter for 16 days leading up to the congressional vote on the repeal of net neutrality on December 14th. Using this information, I then went through and tried to figure out what types of conversations were people having around this issue, what type of language were they using to express opinions, and if there was any difference between people who were tweeting original thoughts versus people who were parts of guided information campaigns. Because we know from the recent presidential election and the FCC open comment period on this issue that a lot of people are repeating things that have been provided by organizations. So my two hypotheses. The first one was that the majority of tweets that were a part of this campaign were parts of these guided information campaigns and weren't actually unique views. And then the second part, using graph theory, I suspected that community detection would reveal that people were using this campaign as a way to voice concern to their elected officials about net neutrality. So my approach, I scraped tweets, I passed them through Spacey to do part of speech tagging and tokenization, limitization. I then used NetworkX to create graphs and do community detection and some between the centrality calculations, and then I built a web app using Flask. Here's an example of the type of messy data that you have to deal with if you're scraping Twitter. As you can see, some of these contain tokens that are not words, some of them aren't even in English, and in some of them all the meaning is contained in the hashtags that aren't parsable through tokenization. So who was talking? By looking at the counts of the number of times that specific text showed up in my data, I was able to determine that about 70% of these tweets were part of guided information campaigns and were not people expressing their unique views. About 31% were people saying something that had not been said before. And then a small amount of them were actually tweets about getting rid of net neutrality that ended up in the data by mistake that I was able to remove by identifying hashtags that were unique to them. When were people talking about this? So you can see a few spikes here, and those actually represent campaign tweets, blue or original tweets. And when you look at the areas where this spiked, these three in the middle are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then you see that repeating again at the end. So this might mean that people are more likely to engage in these campaigns maybe in the middle of the week when they're at work, they're taking a break, get on Twitter and see, oh, this is something that I support, I can click a button and become a part of it. This other one was on a Saturday, which is also a time that I think people are more likely to be on Twitter. Who was engaging with these? So this right here, the blue are original tweets, green are campaign tweets. On the right you have reply counts, and on the left you have retweets. So what we can see from this is that people were engaging a lot more with tweets that were original, not part of guided information campaigns. And when we look at it on a normalized scale, you actually see that only about 1% of campaign tweets were replied to, and only about 10% were retweeted, and the numbers were several times higher for original tweets. How did both these groups talk? Well, using part of speech tagging in Spacey, I found that guided information campaigns overwhelmingly use the word slow as the most common adjective, whereas original tweets use the word free very often. I think if you look at the other words that are unique, you kind of see that the guided information campaigns were more focused on these are the facts about what will happen if net neutrality ends. The internet will become slower for some websites. And for original tweets, people were talking more about their values and sort of philosophically, a free, open internet is good. Okay, so now for the really cool part. This is a community map. This is an interactive network map that shows every single node is a Twitter user, and every single edge means that these people were mentioned together in a tweet at least 10 times. So each one of these is somebody you can see their Twitter page if you click on it. And if you hover over them, it'll show you what their alias is. So you can go through here, and right here we see that these are a lot of tech companies that were grouped together. So people were mentioning them together in tweets. Over here, we have some political figures, as well as Joe Rogan. Right here, it's a lot of news organizations. And then this densest area right here, these are Republican members of Congress and the Senate. By comparison, these are Democratic members of the Congress and Senate right over here. So since this is a whole lot denser, you can actually see that since this was a campaign with mostly people talking about their support for maintaining net neutrality, people were much more likely to tweet at members of Congress who were supporting eliminating net neutrality than they were to tweet at people who were in the Democratic Party and were supporting maintaining it. So I think we can kind of tell that people go to Twitter more to voice their opposition to specific things and state why they're upset than they are to say, I support these members who are representing me because they represent my views. Something that I think would also be really cool for future work here, this is looking at all tweets overall. I think if I had more time, what I plan to do is look at this where only people who are showing up more likely than you would expect them to appear in the graph and slice it by time period. So this would let you get an idea for, on any given day, who are people talking about. And then you could kind of use that with live data to get a better idea for what news stories are breaking or about to break, since this would all be happening in real time. My findings, I think people can tell, obviously, when a campaign is a guided information campaign as opposed to somebody showing their original thoughts, and they're much, much less likely to engage, which makes sense. You'd probably do the same if you're on Facebook or Twitter, and you can tell that somebody that you know is parroting a view that you've heard before. I also think that the public information campaigns that were taking place didn't exactly mirror sentiment that people were expressing of their own volition. You could see that the adjectives were a little bit different, which likely shows that organizations that put these together had specific views that they were trying to promote, which makes sense. We can also see that when tweeting, people are more inclined to voice that they are discontent with an issue or an organization or a politician than they are to express support. So this shows us something about how people view Twitter and its role in public discourse. I already covered my future work, but something else that I think would be interesting would be to look at individual campaigns throughout this period. How quickly do they show up and disappear? That's all for me. Please feel free to email me. My email address is here, my GitHub as well, that has my repo for this project. And feel free to connect with me on Galvanized Talent and LinkedIn. Thank you.